Well, I hope my last video inspired you all to get out this spring and catch a few more bream. The last few weeks have been incredible. Generally, end of March, April and the first couple of weeks of May, they can be extremely obliging, and I've done quite a few sessions so far. As you saw from the last video, caught plenty of fish, and this video really is just to give you a few tips for those that have been out, have tried, maybe hopefully caught a couple of fish, but feel, am I doing it right? Where can I improve? How can I put more fish in my net? And the first massive tip is, as you will see, and my fishing really starts the night before. And that is all about reading the conditions and knowing where the wind is. So this is my first top tip for all you that want to catch more fish. The best bit of angling advice that anybody has ever given me came from my late father. I was about 5 years old, fishing a small farm pond called Hartley Maudit, about 2 acres in size. And he said to me, son, if you want to catch more fish than everybody else, then there's 3 words you need to remember. And those 3 words were, follow the wind. Simple as that. If you want to catch more fish than other people, then all you need to do is know where that wind direction is coming from and use it to your advantage. Now, my bream session starts the day before. And what I do is I go onto my computer, I go on the Met Office website, and I simply find out which way the wind is blowing. There's very little else I can do about temperature, whether it's going to be cloudy, sunny, water temperature, atmospherics. But with wind direction, you can use that to your advantage, especially when you're fishing for bream. They are very predictable. They will follow the wind, and by that I mean if it's a north wind, you need to go to the south bank where the wind is lapping the shores, turning up all, making it like a washing machine, because it's turning all the food up. The bream will follow that, and carp will do that as well. So if you're a carp angler, then my advice is to follow the wind. Now, as I said, the night before I'll go on the app, and that will give me a general idea of where I'm going to be setting up. Not pinpointing the exact swim, but as I said, if it's a north wind, I'm going to be aiming to go to the south bank. So if you've got a lake where you've got more than one car park, then parking in the car park with the shortest walk and knowing where you're going to be fishing is going to be advantageous, because you're going to be getting to your swim quicker, you're going to be getting your rods out quicker. So really is important when you're bream fishing and when you're carp fishing. Obviously I'll arrive on the bank, I'll then scan the water. If I can see fish moving, then I can then set up accordingly. If you don't go on the actual website, the Met Office website, then just go onto your mobile phone when you're making your flask in the morning, and then just scroll through that, find out which direction it's coming from, and obviously, as I said before, use it to your advantage. Bream will always, or more often than not, be on the bank where that wind is pushing in. So yeah, if you want to catch more fish, then take my advice like I did my late father and follow that wind. Well, there you have it. Obviously wind direction is massively important, especially when you're bream fishing. So we're just going to move on to the second point that I've made, and some of these may seem really obvious, but to some it might not, and I hope that you actually take on board what I'm trying to say. And the first big tip is when you get to the lake. Now, bream, and I'm talking about fishing the sort of 5 to 10 pound range on fairly smallish club venues, not massive reservoirs or lakes with big low stock of bream in. These are your club lakes where you could go and catch 20 in a morning. So my first or my second big tip is to get up early, well before the crack of dawn, when those birds are just beginning to sing, and get down the lake just as that sun is arriving, in darkness really. You already know the sort of area that you're going to be fishing. Generally, the wind hasn't got up, so the lake is going to be flat calm. And if you move to that area that you've already sort of pinpointed from the wind direction, you can look across the lake and you will see fish moving. Carp, tench, even crucians, but especially bream. They will be moving and showing at first light. So have a look across the water, see where the fish are, then you can sit there and actually sit down in your swim and get ready for that session. As I said, first light you will catch at, in the evening as it gets dark, and very, very big bream, and I'm talking like double figured bream, like on a venue like West Hampton that was 50 acres. They are very nocturnal, so we're not talking big bream here, specimen bream. We're talking sort of 5 to 10 pound range where there are lots of them. So you found the fish and you're looking out and you're thinking, so how far out am I going to fish? Well, in general, you're going to have to go at least, I would say, 40 yards. And then sometimes you're going to even have to push that to 80 yards. So look for a swim with open waters. Don't actually get sort of transfixed on, there's an island, I've got a fish next to the island. Certain fish like carp will be grouped around those island margins, tench as well, and crucians. Bream like open water. So you're looking for an area of open water where the bream are showing, where the wind is going to slowly, gently push in later on in the day. And when it comes to fishing at distance, we all have a sort of comfortable casting distance. Now, I would say I can fish comfortably with a feeder at about 60 yards. But a lot of anglers struggle with 60 yards. So I try to explain to people you need to fish within your means. There is no point trying to cast 80 yards if you're going to be going all over the place. Fish at 50 yards, 40 yards. Just get that nice comfortable casting distance. You've already got, fish in your swim in an area that is looking good, and just don't try and force that cast. Make a cast, just fill your feeder with ground bait, get that casting weight correct, cast out. If it's 40 yards, 50 yards, then you can just put the line in the real line clip, and then throughout the day, if the wind does pick up, you're going to be still able to hit that distance. Now, I must admit, if I try and cast 30 yards, I'm probably worse than if I cast at 60 yards. And if I go for 80 yards, I am going to drop my shoulder on the cast, and in general, it's going to go a little bit left. So very, very important. It's better to fish at 40 yards, 50 yards accurately than actually fishing at 70, 80 yards all over the place. So the next point is mixing ground bait. Now, a lot of people do have a lot of problems mixing ground bait, and I just can't see it because it is so simple. With bream, you don't have to mix the perfect ground bait. It doesn't have to be a certain type of ground bait. As long as it's a good quality ground bait, you put half a bag, and I wouldn't go putting the whole bag in a bucket, because if you do muck it up, you've got none to start with again. So put half a bag of ground bait, half a kilo in a bucket. Get a bait box of water from the lake and just tip a little bit in, give it a good stir up, a little bit more, and just keep doing that until you can actually just get the ground bait and it just sits in your hand in a nice firm ball. What you then need to do is just leave that for 10 minutes. It will dry out. Get that little bait box of water, dribble a little bit more in, mix it up again. Might leave it for another 5 minutes, and then you might just have to add a little bit more. But what you don't want to do is add too much water, great big stodgy lump of ground bait that's going to do nothing for you. But at the same time, you don't want to mix it up too dry. So don't just put half a kilo in a bucket, add some water, that's fine, and start fishing. Because if those particles haven't taken on the water, then they're going to lift up. If there's any tow, drift, you're going to have that ground bait and particles moving all over the place, spreading the fish about. So you do need to mix it up. So take a little bit of time, little water, a little bit of water at a time, and just take a bit of time over that to get it correct. Now, a big tip is at the end of each session, I always take home what I've got left, whether there's some maggots and some ground bait, and that I will put into a freezer bag or an ice cream container, and I will freeze it down. The live maggots go into your ground bait, the dead maggots, that gives you an alternative, because Bream do love dead maggots and they can outfish live maggots on certain days. The night before, when you've looked at which way the wind's blowing, your tackle's all ready to go at first light, go to your freezer, get that bag of ground bait out. Come the following morning, it's almost going to be perfect. You just test it and it'll probably be ready to go. You might have to just sprinkle a tiny little bit of water on it, but it will get you fishing straight away. And that is my next point, is that ground bait will activate your swim as soon as you get to the lake and you've actually decided on what swim you're fishing. So you can put that ground bait into a big feeder. I sometimes take a separate rod, like carp anglers would take a spod or spom rod, and it's got a big feeder on it. And what I will do is I will fill that up, cast 60 yards or where I'm seeing those fish move, give it kind of 10 or 15 seconds, and then you just strike it off. You can do it with the rods you're using. Sometimes that will crinkle the hook link and you'll have to then tie new hook links, which isn't a problem at the start of each session. So that ground bait that comes out the freezer the night before allows you to make a dozen casts into that swim at a comfortable distance. Leave it 15 seconds, strike it off, wind it in, repeat that, and then once you've done 12 casts, you've got a bed of bait out there nicely at the same distance, and then you can then simply just take your time, set up your rods, get those marked out. You might want to use marker sticks. I quite often will go in the garden and use marker sticks the night before, get the rod that I'm feeding that ground bait and the rods I'm using all marked out to sort of 60-65 yards, comfortable casting distance. You might have to adjust that because I might have to come in a bit, I might have to go out further, but generally 65 yards is a good distance for me to cast on my club lakes. So we've got that swim nicely prepared. Hopefully by the time I'm setting up my tackle, the bream are going to start moving in and feeding. So my next point is accuracy. Now, accuracy and bream fishing isn't as important as crucial as whether you're fishing for, let's say, crucian carp, where I want to be dropping my baits and my loose feed need to be on, let's say, this table, this dining room table. With bream, I used to spread it about a bit because bream do like the bait. They come in, and if you've got double-figured bream coming in to all your bait on a dining room table, then mop it up and they'll be out of your swim and gone, and that feeding spell will be very short. So when it comes to my club lakes, I'm sort of looking at the size of my living room and I'm trying to cast a little bit left, a little bit right at the same distance, just to get a nice sort of spread of bait there. And although I'm spreading that bait out to the size of my living room, when I actually come to casting my rods, I want to be putting my rods and my hook bait right in the middle of that. So accuracy is important. It's important to stand in the same place when you cast and use the line clip on the reel. Now, on some of my club lakes, excuse me, it's very occasionally you might have a carp, but in general it's bream. They don't scream off. The bites are just a little beep beep and then it drops back, pick up into the fish. So I generally stand behind my rod rest, my back rest, make a cast from there, hit the clip, lower the rod down, sink the line, undo the bail arm, put the rod in the rod rest, and then I just put the bail arm over and start turning the spool on the bait runner, not with the handle because you don't want to move the feeder out there, just to tighten up to your alarm. You can actually use your hand, you can actually feel that line just tighten to the feeder, move your spool, tighten the line, bobbing on, or if you're using a quiver tip, you can just cast out, hit the clip, almost just lower the rod down onto the rod rest, get a nice little bend in that tip, and that will sink your line and you're good to go. So get in the use of using a line clip. Now if you're fishing a venue where you might hook 20-30 pound carp like I used to at West Hampton, don't leave that clip on, because if a carp takes off with it, it's either going to take your rod in, smash your hook link. So yeah, you know, you've got to look at your venue, you've got to be careful. If you're going to leave the line clip on and get a few turns on the reel, then you need to sit by your rod, pick up, and if it is a carp, be prepared to hit that clip, because if you don't, you could be in some sort of trouble. So moving on to the next one, the size of the feeder you're going to be using. Now, most people think, oh, it's a 50 gram, a 30 gram, a 20 gram, and they use the weight to get the distance. But there's a reason why you get a big cage feeder as a 30 gram and the same size cage feeder as a 50 gram. And that is because the amount of bait it carries. Now, bream like a lot of bait, so I like to use a big cage feeder, probably one on the large size, and I like to use, if I can, a 50 gram, which might seem a bit heavy for you, but then the weight of that feeder will improve your hooking properties. If you're using a 25-30 gram feeder and you're getting your quiver tips going tap tap tap, or you're getting little bleeps on your alarm, that might be fish getting away with your hook bait. So by increasing the weight, when a fish goes down and picks up, the weight of the feeder drags the hook into the bottom lip, and if you're getting and landing fish and that hook is in the bottom lip with bream, your rigs are pretty good. So size of feeder not only determines how far I'm going to be casting, but it also can improve your hooking properties and also the amount of bait you introduce. So go for a biggish cage feeder, slightly heavier than what you probably would use for maybe tench or rudd or cruising carp, I would say. Another great tip that my mate Chris kind of stumbled on was I always used to tie my hook links up with a 6-7 turn blood knot. But then Chris was using a knotless knot like all us carp anglers do when we're using a hair. But he was cutting the hair off, and the angle off a very small hook, you know, a size 18 or 16, was really acute. And the reason carp anglers tie it knotless knot style is because they want to get that angle, because when a fish tries to blow that bait out, that boilie out, that hook out, the hook turns, it's already pointing down, and quite often, more often than not, it should take hold. Whereas with a 6-turn blood knot, it's sort of straight off the actual hook link and it can get blown out without taking hold. So I always tie my hook links up and my size 16 Super Specialist using a knotless knot. Very important. The hook holds are absolutely fantastic. The hook is like in the bottom lip. You've got to get a disgorger out to get it out sometimes, because you can't actually get it out with your fingers. Moving on again, and this is a massive point. If you're fishing there with 2 rods and you've had 3 fish on your left hand rod, there's a reason why that right hand rod is not going. There's something wrong, and I will always work as hard as I possibly can to get both those rods, you know, producing fish. 1 fish, coincident. 2, coincident. 3 fish on the left hand rod, there's something wrong with that right hand rod. I've even swapped the rods over, and the rod that was catching fish on the left is now catching fish on the right. So it's not there's fish on the left of my swim or my right of my swim. Your hook link needs to be changed. It might look perfect, all the components are the same, but for some reason it's just not working. You might even want to take your hook link further up, take your feeder off, take a bit of line out, because it might just be lifting off the bottom. There might be a little kink in your hook link, or your hook link might just be ½ an inch longer. Get that other rod working. Very important. Don't just think all the fish are on that side of the swim. Another great tip is when you actually cast out and that feeder lands on the surface, just feel it down, hit the bottom. You do not want to move that feeder. I see anglers cast out, they hit the surface, they go like that, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? All that food has come out that feeder, and now you're fishing a single hook bait away from your main amount of food, and that food in your feeder is there to attract a fish in to your hook bait. So when that feeder lands on the bottom, if you're standing next to the water and you are unclipping and maybe using a little elastic stop knot as a marker, don't kind of just click your bail arm over and move your rod back and put on the rod rest, because all you're doing is dragging that feeder away from that food. So when it lands, release the bail arm, put your rod down on a slack line, click it over, and then just tighten up using the bait runner. Not the handle, the bait runner, and just tighten the line up to that feeder. That's all you need to do. So don't, whatever you do, move that feeder. Another massive edge, and what I've seen all good anglers do, is they fully understand that you might only have a short feeding spell. The bream might come in. The other day we started at 8. By 10 we couldn't get a bite, but we'd had, I think, 8 bream and a carp, and then it was as if the lake just died. So you need to make the most of that feeding spell. And when I catch a fish, whether it be a bream, a crucian, a tench, I'll unhook it, I'll leave it to rest in the landing net, and then I will get that rod straight back out in the swim and fishing. Okay, I might even take the other rod out, wind that in, fill the feeder, get it back out, so I've got 2 rods back in the swim, primed and ready to catch. I can then go and deal with that bream in the net, weigh it, get a photograph. Quite often you'll have to fish in the net, you get both your rods out, you're getting your camera or your weighing equipment set, and one of the rods will go again. No problem, put another fish in the landing net, you've got a brace there. But one thing I won't do is I won't put that rod back out. So at any one point, I don't want to have 3 rods go off, or two fish in a landing net and that other rod that's still out go, really. If it does, it does, but 3 fish on a bank in a landing net, there's no more. Generally that won't happen. You might quite often get a brace shot, which is nice. So whatever you do, don't muck about. You need to get those rods in that water, in the swim, and maximise the time your bait's actually in the lake, because if you're mucking about with rods out up the bank while you're weighing a fish, that could be another fish. So a few tips there to get going: arriving at dawn, getting some bait in the swim to activate it, using some ground bait from the feeder, from the freezer to get you going, standing in the same place, fishing accurately, using the line clip, size of feeder if you're getting little bleeps and you feel fish are getting away with it. If you want to get better hook holds, tie your hooks on knotless knot. If one rod's working, you've got to work the other one. Don't move the feeder once it's landed. And if you've got a fish in the landing net, get that rod back out. So I hope there's a few there just to up your percentage, stack the odds in your favour to go from catching maybe 2 or 3 bream to maybe a dozen bream in a morning. So good luck. Practice makes perfect. If your casting's not that good, you need to just go down. The more you get out there, the better your casting will be, and the more fish you're going to put in your net.